In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make perfect color prints on an inkjet printer that match what you see on your screen. Now, for this to work, your screen does have to be properly calibrated, so everything that I'm teaching you here assumes that you've already done that. I've got a picture here on the screen that we're going to work with, and this is a photograph I made in my neighborhood last month. One of my neighbors had the entire front yard of their house filled with probably 20 different inflatable Christmas decorations. The first thing I want to do is I want to duplicate the image because we don't want to work with our original image. The original has several adjustment layers on it, and this is my full resolution archive image that has all the adjustments, all the editing done to it. We don't want to do any work with that because I don't want to take the risk of accidentally saving it after I've made other adjustments and ruining my archive image. So we've made a copy. We're going to go ahead and close the original. Now, the very first thing we need to do now is flatten the image of our copy, and we'll do that under the layer menu. Go down here to flatten image. You can see all of our layers over here. They're going to go away. And then we need to decide what size we're going to make this. And I promised the people who own this house that I would give them a print. And what I'm going to give them is approximately a 6x9 image. That way I can print that on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and leave enough border that I can sign it and that they can have room to mat it and frame it. So I'm going to go here to, under the image menu, image size. The Epson printer that I'm working with, I'm using an Epson R2400. Works best if you have a resolution of 360 dpi. So we'll go ahead and set that, and then we'll do our size. And we're going to get out of this a 6 by 8.6 image, which is close enough to 6 by 9. So we'll go ahead and hit OK to that. And I'm going to hit actual pixels here so that we can see the image 100% on screen, because we're going to need to sharpen it. If we printed the image as is, it looks pretty good and it is sharp, but if you apply a little bit of sharpening to it, you can make the image details pop a little bit. Whenever you take a full-size image and resize it down to a smaller size, the image softens up a little bit, and sharpening can restore that lost detail. Now, normally for this I use NYX Sharpener Pro with the output sharpener. And because a lot of you don't have that, I'm going to show you how to do it using the Unsharp Mask filter in Photoshop. Now, unsharp masking can be used in two different ways. You can use it to sharpen an image, or you can use it for what they call local contrast enhancement. And local contrast enhancement means that you're making the image contrast increase without increasing the... You're not increasing the overall contrast of the image. The lights and darks stay the same, but you're going to increase contrast between tones that are very similar to each other, and that's what local contrast enhancement does. It makes different tones that are very close to each other differentiate better. The first thing we're going to do, though, we want to sharpen this image rather than adjust its contrast. And for sharpening, you're usually better off using a smaller radius, usually something smaller than 1. So I'm going to go ahead and set the radius to 1. And then the amount is usually set pretty high. Use a low radius and a higher amount. And you can see now that the grass down here is starting to look more textured and sharper than before. If we turn this off using the preview, you can see how much softer that gets. You see it coming in and out. And this is what we want. The print will look a lot sharper that way. It'll appear more detailed. Now, because the print is going to be a lot smaller than what we're seeing on the screen here, you can have it just very slightly over-sharpened looking, and when it's viewed in the smaller print, it'll actually look very good. If you have it just to where it looks good without looking a little bit over, sometimes it will not look as sharp as it could. I think for this one I'm going to use an amount of about... That 63 looks good. Let's go ahead and do that. And we'll go back up here to fit screen. Actually, I want to make this look a little smaller, so I'll use the negative magnifier to get the smaller image. Now, if we just print this as is, it's probably going to print a bit darker than what the screen shows, and that's because when you look at an image on a computer screen, you're seeing an image that is basically self-illuminated because the screen itself produces its own light. You're seeing transmitted light rather than light reflected off of a piece of paper. And light reflected off of a piece of paper will never have the same luminosity that you get viewing something that has its own light source like a screen. And in order to preview the amount of darkening we're going to get, Photoshop has a feature called soft proofing. And in order to make that work, we need to duplicate this image now so that we have a second copy we can look at as a reference. Now both of these look identical right now, and what we're going to do is this is the version we're going to print right here, and this is just our reference copy to look at. We're going to take the one that we're going to print, and we're going to go up to View, Proof Setup, Custom. And when you click that, you're going to see a dialog box here that asks you to choose an ICC profile. And you can see I've got a long list of them here for different papers and such. The paper that you're working with, the manufacturer should have profiles that you can download from their website. And what I'm going to be working with today is Ilford Gallery Smooth Gloss. And so I've got the profile for that here, and the manufacturers name these profiles very cryptically. The one that's named GPS GP12 underscore EPS R2400 underscore PS PPN, that's actually the one for the Ilford Smooth Gloss for the Epson 2400. Ilford's website has a cheat sheet on there that tells you what these names actually stand for. So you want to make sure you choose the right profile from the list. That's assuming you've already got the profiles installed. If not, you'll need to download them from the manufacturer's website. And on both Mac and Windows, if you download the profiles to your computer and then double-click the icon for each profile, it'll automatically install in the correct place in your operating system. If you don't see them in Photoshop after you've done that, you need to close Photoshop and then restart Photoshop, because if you've got Photoshop open when you install a profile, it may not pick up the new profiles until you've closed it and restarted it. So we're going to go ahead and choose the one we're needing here, and that was what was already chosen since that's what I used the last time I made a print. The next thing you see is Preserve RGB Numbers. You want to leave that alone. Do not check it. The next thing is Rendering Intent, and there's 4 choices: Perceptual, Saturation, Relative Colorimetric, and Absolute Colorimetric. The only ones that you ever use for fine art printing would be either Perceptual or Relative Colorimetric. What those mean is that if you've selected relative colorimetric, there's going to be some colors in your picture that the printer cannot reproduce, because the range of colors that any inkjet printer can reproduce is less than what many digital cameras and many color films can capture. And any colors that are outside that range of what the printing paper and the printer inks can render has to be dealt with in some way, and that's what these rendering intents do. They tell the computer what to do about these colors that are what they call out of gamut, meaning that they're outside the color gamut or the range of color that the printer can reproduce. If you choose relative colorimetric, all the colors that are within the printer's gamut are left alone, and then any that are outside it are shifted to whatever the closest color that the printer can actually reproduce would be. This works really well if you've got a scene where most of the colors are ones that aren't going to be difficult to reproduce, and some of the ones that are difficult typically are things like very deep blues or extremely highly saturated reds and greens. Now, if you do have a picture that has a lot of these colors that are outside the reproduction gamut of your printer, you'll be better off using the perceptual rendering, which my understanding of it is that it shifts all the colors slightly to make them all fit in the gamut and also look correct relative to each other. I'm going to go ahead and use perceptual for this because I think some of these bright reds are going to be outside the printer's gamut. And the best way to understand these is just to try them out. Make some prints using both rendering intents and see which ones work better for you. Now, once you've chosen a rendering intent, make sure that black point compensation is checked, and then also check simulate paper color. That also needs to be checked. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. And what you see here is the one that we've done all this on. This is the one we set the proof setup on. The image has become darker and duller looking, and the colors have shifted a bit. what the proof setup that we turned on does is it simulates on screen what the print's going to look like that comes out of your printer. And so we can compare this one that has the proof setup turned on to the copy, which does not. And by looking at the two, we can actually make adjustments to the one we're going to print, the one that has the proof setup turned on, using curves adjustments to make it look like the way it should look, like the original over here. And so we'll go down here, we'll make sure we have selected the image we're going to work on. Choose a curves adjustment layer, and we'll just lighten it until we get it looking similar to the other image. Now this is called soft proofing, when you're proofing on the screen what the print's going to look like. The soft proofs tend to do a real poor job of showing how dark tones will render. And so typically what I try to do is I try to make the soft proofed version match the original version in its midtones and lighter tones, and I just ignore the dark tones. They tend to fall into place correctly if you have everything else adjusted. So I don't. This suggests that because the dark tones look real light and low in contrast, that you should increase contrast. You really don't want to do that. The picture will look too contrasty in the print if you do, because the soft proof really just doesn't reproduce very accurately what the print's going to look like in these darker tones. So we're going to concentrate on the light tones and the mid-tones. And if we look at Santa's beard here, we can see that this looks pretty close to the original here. And by turning off the adjustment layer that I've done, you can see how these middle tones, like in the grass and then this look, I think we're actually a little lighter here than the original. Look at want to compare the sky also. The sky looks like, in the proofed one, the sky is a little darker than the original. So sometimes it's kind of a compromise to get everything right. I'm going to I think that looks pretty close. I think we're going to stick with this. And so here's what we're going to do next. Now that we've done an adjustment layer to make the soft proofed image look like the original, we want to go up here to view again and turn proof colors off by unclicking proof colors. And now you'll see that compared to the original one, this one looks too light. But when we print it, the print will actually look correct. It'll look like this one, because this adjustment we've done to this compensates for that darkening that you see when you make prints. And so we're ready to make a print of this now. Make sure our printer's turned on. And while that's getting ready, we'll go ahead and set up the print in Photoshop. And we'll go under the File menu to Print. Choose the correct printer. We've got Epson Stylus Photo R2400 already selected. We're going to change the paper here to horizontal because it's a horizontal image. We're going to send 16-bit data. If the picture is in 16-bit originally, which ours is, I almost never work with 8-bit images when I'm doing my fine artwork, because the 16-bit images, when you're working in black and white, they can carry more gray tones, and in color they can have more color. Now most modern printers really can't benefit from the 16-bit data, but I go ahead and send it anyway because it's not really hurting anything. And I expect that printers in the future are going to do a better job of handling that higher bit depth, and will show better quality than we're getting from current printers. Now we need to go into print settings here, and before we do that, we need to make sure that we have the color management set correctly, though, and that's done over here. You should have clicked where it says Document, not Proof. In the profile it says here, that's the profile the image is in. Adobe RGB is the one I worked in as an editing profile. So we just leave that alone. Go down to Color Handling, choose Photoshop Manages Colors. Now you have choices. You can do Color Manages Color, or Printer Manages Colors, I'm sorry, or Photoshop Manages Colors. We're going to choose Photoshop Manages Colors. We're going to choose the printer profile, and I've already got that chosen. This is as we did with the proof setup. this is the profile for the Ilford paper that we're going to use. So we'll choose that. Now you want to make sure the rest of the stuff is set up the way it was in the proof setup. You want perceptual rendering intent because that's what we used for the soft proofing. You want black point compensation because we did that with the soft proofing. The simulate paper color and simulate black ink, these are grayed out because we're not printing a proof, we're printing the document. This is actually something that's used in the graphic arts industry to print proofs for clients where you're printing a proof on a paper that's not the same as the paper that the final project is going to be done on. Like, let's say you're a graphic designer and you design a brochure. You print a proof for the customer on your inkjet printer just so they can prove it, but the final print is going to be done on whatever type of paper that you're going to run through your press. So the proof setup stuff in the actual printing and the choice of making a proof here is not something that applies to photographers. This is only for graphic arts people. So once again, we've got document chosen, Photoshop manages colors, the correct profile for the paper we're using, perceptual rendering intent, because that's what we use in the proof setup. Now, if you had chosen relative colorimetric in the proof setup, that's what you would choose here. Black point compensation. You should use this anytime you do any printing because it helps compensate for the difference between the black that you see on screen and the black that the paper is capable of rendering. It gives a more accurate rendition when you choose that. Now, once we've got all these set, we go up here to print settings. And we're going to, color matching you ignore, it's grayed out because Photoshop is managing color, so you can't control these. This is the printer driver right here. Printer driver doesn't do any color matching when you use Photoshop managing colors. Paper handling is really something that's not something that's an issue with most photo work or the cover page. Those are for printing text documents. So we'll go down to print settings. Now this is the important stuff. You have to choose a media type. Now the Epson printer driver only has media types for Epson's own papers. If you're printing with a non-Epson paper like I'm using, you need to check the manufacturer's instructions for the paper, because they'll tell you what setting to use for their paper. Ilford says for the gallery smooth gloss paper that you should choose premium photo paper semi-gloss in the Epson driver, so that's what we're going to choose. The choice of color of black and white is grayed out because we're sending a color image with Photoshop managing the colors. If the printer was managing the colors, then you could choose whether you wanted to print in black and white or color. Color settings are off, no color adjustment, because once again, Photoshop's taking care of that. Print quality, we're going to set best photo. Mirror image should always be turned off because that'll reverse the image. High speed I turn off also. I believe the prints look a little bit better when they're printed without having the high speed turned on. What high speed does is the print head goes back and forth as it's making the print. With high speed turned on, it will lay down ink both directions, which doesn't leave much time for the ink to dry between passes. And generally, most people leave the high speed turned off for fine art printing. It takes longer to make the print, but I think it's worth it. Once you've got all these things set, you can hit save, and then you can choose where you want the image to be on the paper. This shows you right here a rendering of the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. The default is for the position to be centered. I always turn that off because I don't want it perfectly centered. I want the image to be slightly high on the page to leave space down below where I can sign the picture and where I can title it. And so this top and left, this is how far down from the top the image starts and how far over from the left it starts. I leave the left alone because I want it centered. Top I'm going to change from the 1.125. And the actual number that's in here is going to depend on the size of your image compared to the size of your paper. This image happens to be one where it has to be 1.125 inches down from the top to be centered. I want to make it 0.7 down from the top. And this leaves some space down here to sign it. Once you've got all this set, and these are things over here about match print colors and such, leave those all unchecked. Scale to fit media should be unchecked also, because if you do that, it's going to fill the entire page and not leave us space. Plus, we don't have enough resolution in this to print over the entire page. I sized this to be a 6 by 8.5 image, so you don't want to change that. Once all this stuff is set, hit the print button. It'll start printing, and whenever the printer gets done, I think it'll take about 5 or 6 minutes for it to come out of the printer. We'll have a finished print we can look at and see how it compares to our image on the screen.